10 o'clock Eastern Time this morning, just collapsing on itself.
The second building that was hit by the plane has just completely collapsed.
We have no idea what caused this.
Almost looks like one of those planned implosions.
As if a demolition team set off. When you see the old demolitions of these old buildings, it folded down on itself, and it is not there anymore.
If you wish to bring anybody who's ever watched a building being demolished on purpose knows that if you're going to do this, you have to get at the under infrastructure of a building and bring it down.
We heard another explosion, and I'm assuming that's the one that came from the lower level, since there were two. And I said,
right, because it was like 18 minutes apart.
Well, this is the first explosion, and there was a second explosion in the same building. There were two explosions.
Okay.
Federal agencies that were down there do believe that there was some sort of explosive device somewhere else besides the planes hitting.
NBC's Pat Dawson is close to the scene of that attack. Pat?
Just moments ago, I spoke to the chief of safety for the New York City Fire Department. Chief Albert Turry, he received word of the possibility of a secondary device, that is another bomb going off. He tried to get his men out as quickly as he could, but he said that there was another explosion which took place. And then an hour after the first hit here, with the first crash that took place, he said, there was another explosion that took place in one of the towers here. He thinks that there were actually devices that were planted in the building. The second device, he speculates, was probably planted in the building.
There were 2 or 3 similar huge explosions, and the building literally shook. You literally shook at the base of this building.
First one and then the other. Some say after secondary explosions.
When a big explosion happened, all of a sudden the elevator blew up, smoke. I dragged the guy out. His skin was hanging off, and I dragged him out, and I helped him out to the ambulance.
Walking down the stairs, we made it to the 8th floor. Big explosion. Blew us back into the 8th floor.
Just get out of the tunnel, and it blew.
The subway tunnel?
Yeah.
Tell us what's happening out there.
Oh my We just witnessed some kind of secondary follow-up explosion on the World Trade Center number 2, the one.
Secondary.
We understand now there has been a secondary explosion on Tower 2.
There was another major explosion. The building itself, literally the top of it, came down, sending smoke and debris everywhere.
Collapsed.
5 blocks from the World Trade Center, and we were standing here when there was some sort of collapse or explosion. Do you know if it was an explosion or if it was a building collapse?
To me, it sounded like an explosion.
When I try to save people, in the moment we heard a big explosion coming down. Everything just went black. Everything came down, glass started popping. People got hurt, stuff went on top of them. And it was a big explosion. Everything got dark, real dark, like snow.
The FBI is here, as you can see. They had roped this area off. They were taking photographs and securing this area just prior to that huge explosion that we all heard and felt.
Coming over our radio, get out of the area. The second tower is coming down.
They tell you the second tower is coming down?
Yes, it's about to collapse.
At 10:30, I tried to leave the building, but as soon as I got outside, I heard a second explosion and another rumble and more smoke and more dust. I ran inside the buildings, the chandelier shook, and again, black smoke filled the air. Within another 5 minutes, we were covered again with more silt and more dust. And then a fire marshal came in and said we had to leave because if there was a third explosion, this building might not last.
We just saw that as well. The second tower, the only one that was standing, tower number 1, we saw some kind of explosion, a lot of smoke come out at the top of the tower, and then it collapsed down onto the streets below.
David Lee, what can you tell us?
John, just seconds ago there was a huge explosion, and it appears right now the second World Trade Tower has just collapsed.
One eyewitness was standing among a crowd of people on Church Street, 2.5 blocks from the South Tower, when he saw a number of brief light sources being emitted from inside the building between floors 10 and 15. He saw about 6 of these flashes, accompanied by a crackling sound before the tower collapsed. Ginny Carr was attending a business meeting on the 36th floor of One Liberty Plaza, across the street from the World Trade Center, and caught the entire first attack on tape. A second explosion can be heard 9 seconds after the crash.
Wow.
sounded like something crashed.
So what happened in the North Tower? Ask Willie Rodriguez. Willie, a janitor who worked in the World Trade Center for 20 years, was in sub-level 1 when the North Tower was hit.
And all of a sudden we hear boom! I thought it was a generator that blew up on the basement. And I said to myself, oh my God, I think it's a generator. And I was going to verbalize it. When I finished saying that in my mind, I hear boom! Right on the top, pretty far away. So it was a difference between coming from the basement and coming from the top. And that's, everybody started screaming. And a person comes running into the office saying, explosion, explosion, explosion. He got his hand extended and all the skin was pulled from his under his arm, all the way to the top of the fingertips, and he was hanging on both arms. Hanging and hanging. And then I look at his face and he was missing parts on his face. And I said, what happened? What happened? And he said, the elevators, the elevators. And when there were many explosions, and when I actually talk about those explosions, they said that, well, there were so many kitchens in the building, and they have probably those gas canisters. And I said, I don't believe that, because the building was a Class A building. There are very strict guidelines of what you can put in a kitchen. And I really doubt it was gas. So there was a lot of misconceptions of what happened that day in terms of the explosions. But up to date, I haven't received an actual explanation about the different explosions that I heard on the upper floors and not all the way to the top.
The windows in the lobby of the North Tower were blown out, and marble panels were blown off of the walls. This was brushed off as damage from a raging fireball that went barreling down the elevator shafts. However, the World Trade Center's core and elevator shafts were hermetically sealed, aka airtight. The fire could not possibly have had enough oxygen to travel 1,300 feet down, retaining enough energy to destroy the bottom 8 floors of the building. On 9/11, New York City lost 343 firefighters at the World Trade Center. Since they were the ones inside the towers before and as they collapsed, I'd say they've got a pretty good grasp on what happened. So what does the FDNY think? First, we had this interview from the Naudet brothers documentary.
It was like posting the wars and there was nobody there. Where the fuck? What do we do? We made it outside, we made it about a block.
We made it at least 2 blocks, and we started running. Floor by floor, it started popping out.
It was if they had detonated. They were planned to take down a building. Boom, 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 boom.
All the way down. I was watching it and running.
Just ran up West
Street. And then you just sort of, this cloud of shit chasing you down.
Couldn't outrun it. West Street.
In these interviews, numerous members of Engine 7 described explosions preceding the collapses, not to mention the damage to the lobby of the North Tower.
I heard a loud boom. And my first thing, I was right at the desk there on the left-hand side when you come into Tower 1. And I walked out, I didn't go out. I walked to where all the doorway was, the glass were broken, and I looked out, and I seen in the building across the street, I seen the shadow coming, I seen just the shadow in the building across the street coming down. And with that,
I wasn't expecting to see the damage that I saw in the lobby. And the people, the bodies, the burnt people, the injured people, I really wasn't prepared for that.
The lobby is about 6 stories high, and the lobby looked as though a bomb had exploded there. All the glass was taken out. There were 10-foot by 10-foot marble panels that were once walls. They were loose from the wall of the Trade Center.
I went around by the freight elevator and I could see it was just blown. It was just a giant shit. 30th floor. We hear another explosion. And at that time we heard a huge explosion.
Firefighter Louis Caccioli told People Weekly, "I was taking firefighters up in the elevator to the 24th floor to get in position to evacuate workers. On the last trip up, a bomb went off. We think there were bombs set in the building." For more than a year, the Port Authority blocked the release of a tape of firefighters' transmissions from the World Trade Center on 9/11. In November 2002, the tape was finally released to the New York Times and other news outlets.